Good evening. I'm Apostle T.B. Walker. I want to take this time to welcome you to our Thursday Night Live Bible study. Certainly glad to have you here. Listen, we've been in the book of Exodus, and I'm going to be continuing in Exodus chapter number 17, verse number 5 through 6. And I'm just going to read this for you. And I think there's some things that I know there's some things that you really need to get out of this. And I'm going to help direct you to it. It says, and the Lord said to Moses, go on before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel. Also take in your hand the rod in which you struck the river, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, and the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders. Now, this is really, really important because God is instructing Moses, in the midst of the turmoil of the people looking and saying, have you brought us out here to starve? God does not give Moses any kind of, fast comebacks. He doesn't say this to the people, to make them feel guilty or to bring condemnation. No, God has a direction and a way that he's dealing with Israel, and he's teaching Moses also the direction and the way that he wants Moses to deal with Israel. Moses comes and says, what should I do? God comes and says, here's what you should do. And Moses is meant to hear, to learn and take notes about what God is doing. In the midst of this murmuring, complaining, God is now providing. He's not coming and saying, well, tell them this, or, and nor is he angry with them. He is now, there's a plan developed for their provision. So God says, listen, here's what you have to do. He tells Moses, I want you to bring the elders with you, and I want you to use what you have used before. There's some things that we don't have to do anything new, but I want you to go with the elders, and I want you to, so that they can see it, because I realize that there's also some questions about your leadership. So I want the other leaders to be around you to begin to see once again that I am with you, that I've chosen you to go out front. Oftentimes we break down and get so miserable because people don't agree with us, instead of watching God's plan, and realizing it's not your job to make people believe you. It's not your job to make sure they know that you're in authority in a time where God is actually telling us clearly that people are going to reject authority, that people are going to be rebellious, that they're not going to heed the word of God. We should not be shocked that that you don't have any power to make people believe that you are who God says you are. But it is God who's going to construct situations, circumstances that will confirm who you are. So, God tells Moses that I want you to take in your hand the rod in which you struck the river, that when you opened up the Red Sea, I want you to take that rod and go. And here's what God is doing. He's infusing Moses with some confidence, because he knows that Moses is thinking, how are we going to drink? And I haven't heard anything yet about water, but I know God is doing something. When God puts this rod in Moses' hand, it means God's doing something. Now, it doesn't mean that what God is doing, because Moses has experienced the Lord in many, many ways, but not like this. We go from faith to faith and glory to glory. He's experiencing God in a way that he has not experienced him before. So God is about to do something that they have never done before, but same tools, right? I'm going to give you the same tools. I'm just going to do something different. Same God, right? Same God, same tools, just different scenario. That's all that it is. That our newness, the new things that we face are just like that. Same God, same tools. Now just a different scenario. So whatever was used before can be used now in the scenario that you're in, because the scenario changes, but the tools don't change, and God does not change. So the same God who picks you, if that tool worked for you before, and God is now saying use the same tool, you have to recognize it is in our minds that we've got to adjust the strategy. It's in our minds that that's not going to work forever. We start doubting. It conjures up from places that are in our flesh. So God is now realizing Moses needs confidence. So he gives Moses confidence because he saw God use this before. The same rod that do these great miracles, Moses knows I'm in a position where, a great miracle is going to be needed. And so God says, listen, I want you to pick up that rod, and I want you to take that with you. And in taking up the rod, it's impossible for Moses to pick up that rod and not remember the deeds that he had done through the Lord, not remembering that rod, even though it wasn't the rod, Moses knows, hey, Again, God's about to do something. So as he picks up this rod, he has confidence, but not in himself. God does not give Moses any personal builders. Right? He doesn't come and give him anything that he needs to look at within himself. He doesn't tell Moses to look at his own heart. He doesn't say, Moses, listen, you are just lacking in courage. No, he says, listen, pick up the rod and remember who brought you here. Pick up the rod and just remember how you got there before, when you've been through some big things already. So the fact that you're here, this doesn't diminish the bigness of this situation, but also it is meant to remind you that as big as the situations were, look how big your God was. And as big as the situation is, what would make you think that it's going to change? So this allows Moses to know, I'm going to be a part and a participant in the deliverance, but I'm also going to get a chance to stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. I'm going to get a chance to check out what God is doing. So he has confidence, but not in himself. This is confidence in God. He's not telling Moses how to build up himself. He's telling Moses how to build up his confidence in God. And when you build up your confidence in God, you build up self-confidence. That self-confidence is in what now God says and not what you think. If God says I can do it, it's not about bragging. It's not about thinking you're all that. It is recognizing, well, listen, if God says it, I'm hearing a miracle already. I've already experienced, the fact that God can get you over troubled water. So that ability to recognize it is there. So he tells Moses, he says, behold, I'm going to stand before you, right? This is what he says. I'm going to stand before you there on the rock in Horeb that the people may drink. Now, this answers the question. Moses doesn't ask the question. What am I going to do on this rock? And how is it going to happen? And Moses is really he's just a human guy, still if God says, put one hand up, and because, you need to pay that bill. So put one hand up and point toward the bills and, and I'm going to be there. And you need to know, okay, you're going to do something, right? Because I've been looking at the bills. I pointed at them a few times. Nothing has happened. So if you're going to do something, this is where Moses now has to believe what God says before the people do. Moses is in a place. God says one thing to Moses. He does not let Moses know how he's going to do it. He says, I'm with you. Listen, the thing that I want you to know is that I'm with you. One of the great themes that you'll see here is that God is with them as they're going through this journey in the wilderness. One of the things that God is trying to let them know continually, I'm with you. The fact that I'm not going to let you know everything that I'm going to do, the fact that I'm not going to make you privy to every single move I'm going to make, that you don't know, what I'm doing in the testing, that I'm sovereign. I can take you to a point where you think it is just too far. Enough is enough. I can stretch you further than you want to be stretched or think you can bear being stretched. But that does not mean I'm not with you. So they are now experiencing God being with them. What do you mean? I'm not with you when you drink. I'm with you when you are thirsty. God is he's letting Moses know, I'm not coming down here now. I've been guiding you even through the thirst. See, that's important for us to understand because we see God like Superman, flying in at the last minute and I'm about to die. And then God swoops down and with a cup of water, cup of cool water in the middle of the desert, must be divine water. He doesn't have to dip from a well or anything like that. And, he gives you that water and it just brings you back to life, right? That's kind of a fantasy. Because that's the problem with that is I'm not even saying that's not true. It is just that the problem with God shows up means that God wasn't there. And, Moses, there's a revelation here. For Moses, he may not get it. He may not totally understand what God is saying, but God is the one who's bringing them even through the thirst with thirst. He brings them through the thirst with thirst. He ends the thirst with water. Right. But he brings them through the thirst while they're thirsty. He uses the thirst. So the thirst has a purpose. What we're going through, there's sometimes you have, sometimes you don't. Your having has a purpose, but your not having has a purpose that is just as important. We have to understand this. So he was with them every step of the way, whether they felt it or not. We don't always feel it. We kind of look and think our senses, if God is around, that our senses are going to tell us that he's there, that we'll somehow feel him. And we don't realize how dull our senses really are, that God is around us all the time and we just don't know it. We call on God as if we're calling him there, not knowing that, like, I'm not talking to him like he's really here. I'm calling him saying, come here, God. I know you're not here. God is saying, listen, I'm there the whole time. And I'm going to show my presence to you and to Moses. Like, the people are going to see it, and God is going to see it. He's with them, but he's just going to manifest himself in the deliverance. It doesn't mean God is not the same huge looming God over the thirst when they were thirsty. So Moses is meant to know, don't worry about your thoughts. If you get on this rock, there's nothing you could do on your own. Listen, Moses is got it. He's going to get this, he's going to smite the rock. Moses is told he's going to hit this rock. And so I'm sure Moses, that's never a method of getting water I've ever seen, right? I mean, if Moses has just hit the rock, it sets him up for this horrible embarrassment, like pop, and like nothing comes out. He's got to depend on God for success. He's got to be obedient to God, but he's got to depend on God for success. So God says to him, you shall strike the rock and water will come out of it, right? Moses has got to believe this. God has told him water's going to come out of it. And he's commanded this in the presence of the Lord has said this, with this resounding yes, that it's going to happen, that he's going to strike the rock and water's going to gush out. And he speaks this, and Moses is to know this and say this even in the presence of the people. There's a need that's there. They need water. There's a rock that's there, right? But at this point, there's still no water. So, there's still no connection to, okay, are you saying there's water beneath the rock? Are you saying there's a water table around and that, it's going to be vibration? How does this connect? And it doesn't connect. We like things that are connective. We like things that make sense. This ends with this, and this becomes this, and that's how we know that this is true. And we love those kind of things. But with God, there's no rhyme or reason here other than the plan of God that he's not revealed. This rock is important. That it's this rock right here, and your need to smite it is important. When we need to remember, when God gives directions, one of the biggest problems we have is editing. We begin to edit the directions. God says, listen, I want you to smite the rock. Now, Moses could have walked around the rock. He could have just, made all kinds of incantations. He could have measured it and looked at it, put his arms around it. He could have talked to the rock. But, he could have just pointed at it and, called it out. But there was still no water. Nothing would work unless he smote that rock. He has to hit that rock. And this is a remarkable miracle that God is preparing for Moses to have. Everybody knows that water does not come from rocks, but there's a hidden drama that's happening behind that. In striking out the rock, there is a drama that Moses is playing out that he is not even aware of, that God is doing something. And even that is for us. I mean, the children of Israel are not aware of it even to this day. Even to this day, they do not understand that people far and wide will read this story and not understand the significance of this rock, the reason why this particular rock is special, and why God spends so much time on this rock, and why this rock has to be smitten. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse number 4, one of the things you find out is that Jesus is the rock. He is that rock. And I'm not talking about the song. This is Jesus was with them the whole time, and that he is that rock. We realize the angel of the Lord, when he comes in certain Christophanies, where there's appearances of Christ. We like those and we know those because he comes in a form that we understand. But Jesus now says, listen, I am that rock. We just as Abel sacrifice and the blood that trained down on that sacrifice. Christ says, I'm in that picture. You don't realize that Noah's Ark is not just a special boat that brought people, from one shore and safely saved them in the midst of destruction. But Christ is that ark. Each thing was a symbol of who Jesus is, the lamb that's slain before the foundation of the earth. Jesus is that lamb. Christ said, I'm the true bread from heaven. Listen, when they receive manna from heaven, Jesus says, listen, I want you to recognize that I'm the bread of life. I am the one who gives them life. I'm the bread which came down from heaven, right? He says, listen, in that manna, Though there's a symbolism, there is a certain truth that comes with that as well. That Jesus is actually saying, listen, I formed myself multiple times for you to be able to dine on me. There's not crazy to think, as he looks and says, this is my blood. Right? We know that that's not his real blood. That's not his real body. But he begins to give us the significance of you having your sustenance coming from me. When you look at the rock, the rock has to be smitten. That's the drama that's going to happen, that's going to save our souls, that Jesus is going to be smitten. He's going to be abused. And so when we drink of that water, he tells a woman at the well, when you drink of this water that I'm talking about, this everlasting water, this me, that I am this water, he says, you'll never thirst again. And so we look at the rock, this rock is Christ. And the Bible says Moses did it. He did so in the sight of God. Now, in ending up here, I want you to take a look at this because this is really important. Look at the personality here. And this is what Moses has to be looking at. This is one of the reasons why Moses failed. Moses failed because he's not looking at the ways of God. Moses knows his ways, right? We know the scripture says that Moses knew his ways. He was a friend in a way that others were not. So he's accountable for knowing the ways of God. And when you look at the ways of God, Moses is being shown how grace works. God never comes. It is as he is in the midst of the people. There's so many other things that he could have done, because we'll later see judgment. We'll see the earth open up and, swallow core. We'll see AI, we'll see lots of sacrificial things that are happening. We'll see straight up punishment that's going to come. But something about this personality here, dealing with how long suffering, if you understand how long God has to suffer before the wrath comes. I mean, how long you get to stay in his face. When you look at this is past that point. If you ever watch one of those, police shows and you like, I'm not for police brutality, but I'm telling you right now, if they ever did that to me, here's what I would do. If I ever had to have somebody talk to me like that, here's what I could do. I don't know if I could do it. You better person than me. We look at those things, and because that's past our, I guess the fences that we place around our care, the fences we place around our love, the fences that we place around our commitment. But look at how wide the fence is that Christ gives. Here he comes. Here's God. He shows divine patience. This is what Moses is supposed to learn, which is why when he decides that he's not going to, when he wants to smite the people, God says, wait a minute. But I told you to speak to the rock. And now he's so angry that he smites the rock. This is a reality that he has not absorbed the lesson that's being taught here. Look at this divine patience. God doesn't say a word about the reproach. Moses comes and says, why do you come and, come at me, but also tempt the Lord? Like, I know what you're saying, and he knows what you're saying. Moses is aware of the presence of God. He's right here. Have you ever had somebody say something loud and you're like, what are you doing? Principle's right here. Well, he's right here. And so Moses is making them aware, and the people know that he's there. And they try to strike out first at Moses. And Moses is saying, listen, he's hearing you. And this is serious. And God then develops a plan for Moses. Like, has the plan already, but it's, you see the development. We get a chance to see the development of the plan to establish Moses as the authority, but to also establish God as the one who cares for them and loves them and wants them to survive. He has not brought them out there to suffer. That's not their whole lot. They're not far from Canaan. This is just a test. They're going to get through this if they have their heads together, if they recognize that God is their provider, if they look and say, we've been here before. I've got to change the way I see suffering. I've got to change the way I respond, to tragedy. I got to change the way I look at things that seem bad. The fact that they're bad doesn't mean there's no way out. Right? God is showing, listen, I will create ways where there are no ways. I'll open doors that no man can shut. So we've got to be able to look at this and take from this what we need, that God is on the throne, that there's nothing too hard for God. And I can promise you that there's tests that God is going to give us, and he's with us through the test. If that's not confidence enough, I don't know what is. That's where we draw our confidence. God, you're doing something. That's what Moses was to draw his confidence. What is he doing? I don't know. I don't know how he's going to do this. But when I saw the rod again and he put me in action, my job is just to obey and do what he said. That's hard because it's counterintuitive. It's hard because it goes against some of the laws of physics that we know, some of the things that you've been trained up to know. Listen, I'm not new to this. I know waters never come from rocks, and it's not a way that anybody's ever taught me. But can you break out of old thinking and enter into new paradigms? You know, if you want a new life, you may have to think differently. You know, if you want new things and you have great goals, you've got to also have great thinking that's connected to great goals. And sometimes the greatest thing you can recognize and think is that your thinking is old, that you need to upgrade. And that's what God is doing. I'm upgrading your thinking about yourself. I'm upgrading your thinking about your abilities. I'm upgrading your thinking about what you can handle. You know, when you get there, it's not like what you can buy, but can you handle it when you can't buy it? You know, it's not like, you know, when you're healthy, it's like, what can you bear if you're not healthy? What's your breaking point? You know, and, you know, God is not trying to say, like, let me show you your breaking point. What he's trying to show you is that your breaking point is not as weak as you think it is. You can take more than you think. You walked away from things many, many times because you thought your breaking point was here. And when God is exposing that it's not, he's not coming to destroy you. He's coming to let you know that, like, you are more than you thought. So Moses is more than he's thinking. God is coming, you know, to stave off depression before he starts believing what the people said. Don't believe the hype. You are more than even people know. Listen, I want you to walk out of this with power. I want you to walk out of this knowing that, yes, you may be going through some testing, but there is water from rocks that's coming. You're not going to starve here. You're meant to get into the promised land. So these are not things to destroy you. These are things to prove to you that God did not make a mistake with you. Listen, I hope you receive that. God bless you. Have an awesome